Good afternoon, everybody. I was going to say good afternoon to people. That's what my last video slash audio got. It said it got 2 views. I must really be on the bad side of YouTube dash Google. They just love me so much. I can always analyze when I've spoken about something that I was not supposed to speak about because weird things start happening on here. Very, very funny things. I can almost tell who will get elected in the next presidential race. I can always tell because of how some of my videos are either amplified or they are just lost in the memory hole. So if people want to know what's going on, just come and ask me, because when YouTube is giving me analytics, I also have my own analytics. But anyway, good afternoon to people. I'm doing a reaction video of sorts to Nancy Grace's August 12th Lawyers Strike Back video that she made. It was so exhausting. I almost didn't make this video because there were so many flaws being presented by the guests she had. I guess she decided to be fair and maybe entertaining. I don't know. I don't know what her thinking was. She had a guy named Tyler Cox and a guy named Edward Paltzik on. They are both attorneys, I believe, and they are the attorneys representing some of the young men that were on the boats that brought over Nolan Wells to Horn Island. And I hope that I said all of that correctly. She had them on, I guess, to ask questions. I honestly felt like I was watching Tweedledee and Tweedledum just sit there and recite nonsensical lyric. So I took a lot of notes, actually. That's what you'll hear in the background if you hear my papers, which I'm going to try not to rustle in front of you. And I'm going to try to compress maybe about 5 points that I thought that they made in the 1 hour length time that she gave them to speak that I found to be an issue, the first issue. Now, I could be wrong on this, and feel free to correct me, but she was interviewing Tyler Cox, which was the guy with the beard, and then Edward Paltzik was the other guy that had the little baseball cap on that was, I don't know, advertising the law firm. But then what I noticed was right next to Tyler Cox was a bourbon sitting on the side of him, a bottle of what looked like bourbon. And on the other side of him was another Cox baseball cap, I guess, to market himself. But the bourbon sitting on the desk, I couldn't really read the whole thing. And I remember being drawn to it, saying, why would he have that sitting there in this interview? Why does it look like he is like flocked on either side by product placement? And so I looked up the bottle, and it looked like it was that Brandon Tatum's brand of bourbon. And like I said, I couldn't blow it all the way up, but I think, I went back and looked up some stuff, and yes, Tatum, I think, has liquor that's manufactured by, I think, the name called Verdict. And then he has 2 different types of bourbon. One is guilty, one is not guilty. And one of those bottles appeared to have been sitting on the desk of Tyler Cox. I just found that to be so questionable. Not because it has anything exactly to do with whether the the guys on the boat did anything to Nolan Wells, but because there was so much circulation of conversation about Nolan Wells' mother being an opportunist, Miss Wansley, and Ben Crump being an ambulance chaser. And then here, if that is Tatum's bourbon, you have the bourbon sitting on the desk of one of the attorneys as product placement. And nothing looks more opportunistic than that. I mean, that's very self serving looking. So that was my first conflict that really didn't have to do with Nolan Wells' death, but has to do with the attorneys kind of making claims about Miss Wansley's character while themselves participating in the very same thing that they say that she is doing. The second conflict, I think this happened around maybe 10 minutes and 43 seconds in. The next conflict, at least for me, was when Tyler Cox, around 4 minutes and 45 seconds, was talking about how the young men, I think it was Warren and two others, they handed over their phones, he said, from the jump, as if to say they've been cooperative. But he never really defined what the word jump meant. So to regular common people, jump just means at the beginning, from the start. But as an attorney, he knows that he could clean that up a little bit better and say when exactly the jump was. Was it at 11 o'clock at night when the mother could not find Nolan Wells? Was it 2 days later? Was it after the second autopsy report? Was it after the sheriff already determined that that the cause of death had been drowning? What time does that mean for? Because jump means different things to different people. And he knows that. So there is a wide room of ambiguity. He did this a lot, as did Edward Palczyk. They did this thing where they would leave a lot of room for the things that they didn't want Nancy Grace to ask questions about, and they would answer it in a broad way, and then they would narrow down things like, look, Nolan Wells was still on the island when our guys left at 4:30. So if you can see from that statement, and I think it was Palczyk who made that, he was securing time. He was securing basically timestamps, if you will, that are not timestamps. But just by saying, hey, my guys left because that matches the GPS on the boat, and two other people saw no one there. And as he said at the end of that video, Edward Palczyk, he said, yeah, all of our bases are covered. When he said that, he was very secure with himself. But I felt like, no, your bases are not covered. Your bases are definitely not covered. And if he's not creative enough to know why I'm saying that, then he should go figure it out. Because around 10 minutes and 43 seconds, I believe Palczyk is talking about the two people that were on the island that are going to be the eyewitnesses, possibly, that would state that they saw Nolan Wells on the island still alive in good form around 6 to 6:30, way after his friends had left on the boat. But what we are talking about here, or at least what I think Nancy Grace was talking about, is credibility. Where they fail at is just because you talk about the credibility of the eyewitnesses and them being able to ID Nolan Wells with 100% certainty, does not mean that you didn't look over there at the guys and work on their credibility, because that's the issue that is going on here, or else you wouldn't be sitting on Nancy Grace's podcast or her video. You wouldn't be getting interviewed by Nancy Grace and answering her questions if there was not a credibility issue. I know some people might say, oh, well, they're doing it for the marketing. That's true. But they're also doing it because the credibility of the young guys, that credibility is shot. Okay? Because you can't say for 100% certainty that the vision of all of those guys was not distorted in some kind of way because of the alcohol they could have been drinking or the drugs that they could have been doing. Although along the way, I noticed that Nolan Wells was made out to be a drinker and possibly doing drugs, when we know that other people were there also maybe participating in these activities. So now that credibility would be shot. It's also shot because the guys said that they didn't know Katie, and that's who Nolan maybe was with on the island. And I think it was, because I wrote this down, towards the end, Paltzik had said that they don't know, it was around 22 minutes and 7 seconds. They don't know Katie. She's not part of their friend group, and they did not know her. But then they're saying they knew that he was with her, which kind of causes a conflict because the other attorney said that their eyewitnesses know Nolan basically by sight. They knew it was him. They weren't able to verify if they were friends with him. So these two things are kind of an inversion of each other. They cannot know who Katie is, but they can visually see that it's her when they leave. And that satisfies their whereabouts and Nolan Wells' whereabouts. But then the eyewitnesses can't be verified to being very close friends with Nolan, but they can ID him. You see how those two things do not make sense? And they're suited to fit their story that they kept repeating, which is, hey, my guys are straight. They're on the boat. At 4:30, he was over here. I knew that they were going to argue this to death and that they were going to keep repeating it. So if they coordinate with others, then it appears to pass the evidentiary rules for a grand jury. Possibly, that's what it sounded like they were doing. So they can have these two witnesses speak to a grand jury and either look like they definitely know that Nolan Wells was alive after the boat left, or they could look like they don't know, and then the whole situation looks defective. Maybe indictment would be aborted before it was even conceived. The last major thing that I think that Paltzik did, and I keep bringing him up because when I watched him, he was so smug. He did not have all of his bases covered. One of the things that he said that was interesting was, I think he was saying somewhere along the lines of, listen, nobody can be an authority on this case unless they have actually set foot on Horn Island. They have to have been there. So then if they had been there, then and only then could they be an authority on the case. Because then it would be easy for them to see that a crime or foul play or whatever he said could not be accomplished on the beach that day, because the beach is kind of short and it's not that wide, and the way it looks is just that it's so flat that people would be able to see everything. I'll put it this way. To be nice, I will say it's a flaw. To not be nice, I would say it's a manipulation. You don't have to be on that beach to be able to speak about how a case like this works. If we, as the listeners and the viewers, see the beach, that doesn't necessarily dissuade us from thinking that maybe the foul play did not actually happen on the beach. Therefore, we would not have to even step a foot on the beach. If there are some of us who believe that maybe something happened in the water between the boats, maybe something happened behind the boat, maybe something happened on the boat, then nobody would ever have to step a foot on the beach to be an authority. I believe he only said that because that's what he wants us to think. Because that idea is hinged to his two eyewitnesses that have remained anonymous. Which brings us to the last thing, the case of anonymity. Listen, when they are saying, they, meaning the two attorneys, are saying that these witnesses have to remain anonymous because of the threats. Yeah. We have historically seen cases where witnesses can get hurt if they do not remain anonymous. But what they fail to mention that there are also other reasons why they wouldn't want people to know who their eyewitnesses are. And that's so the public couldn't draw its own conclusions about conflicts of interest. So the public couldn't say, hey, these eyewitnesses are not very credible. And that's so if that attorney named Angel does decide to take something to the grand jury and use these eyewitnesses, nobody would ever know unless later some kind of like judicial oversight occurred that these eyewitnesses weren't very credible, but they still shaped the mind of the jurors. So I find these eyewitnesses that want to remain anonymous not fearful, but at this point very convenient. Even at the end, I think it was Tyler Cox, around 43 minutes in, he said, why would anybody in the world, why would these witnesses come and make themselves public after people have seen more than 30 days of threats? And my question to that is, well, why are you? Why are you making yourself public and exposing yourself to threats with your baseball cap on one side and Brandon Tatum's bourbon on the other? Why are you coming out? I think these two guys basically went around in a circle in that conversation with Nancy Grace, and she didn't even have to lead them.